sourced from A New World Music, Creative Music by Leo Smith, in which he talks about what is improvisation. Improvisation is an art form used by creative musicians to deliver an expression or musical thought at the very instant that their idea is conceived. The improviser must have an ability to instantaneously organize sound, silence, and rhythm with the whole of his or her creative intelligence. His total life experience is drawn from, including his faculties of right reasoning and the makeup of his psychological and physiological existence. All of these factors determine what is actually being expressed at that moment of conception and creation. Thus, at each instant, the improviser's creation includes the entire spectrum of space and cycle of time, past, present, and future. His music is not, like composition, one that is conceived as one idea at one instant, only to be funneled at a later time through a standard system of notation onto paper as merely a related idea, and finally interpreted and performed sometime in the future as an idea removed at least 3 times from the original. To expound a little bit on that, in terms of the context of Black Lives Matter, liberation movements around the arts, we argue that what form of music, what approach, what concept, what perception of music is more poised for liberation other than improvisation? Improvisation, every single time you get up on this stage, every single time you get in the practice room, every single time you come together and create sound in an improvisatory fashion, it suggests, and by default, you have the at least ability, the opportunity to experience something that the world has never experienced before. So with that, in this paper, it's funny that we're going third after this, because this is sort of getting a sort of providing a historical context to some of the things that we've been talking about, that Randall and Cisco have been talking about. Since 2010, through working with WPFW in Washington, D.C., and through just my own personal study as a musician, scholar, independent scholar, and just through inspiration, is the investigation of community arts organizations like the AACM. But the fact of the matter is that in the 60s and before that, and since then, in practically every city with a sizable Black population in the world, there existed something like this at the exact same time, in the 60s and beyond, in that time that we call now the Black Power generation, the Black radical era, whatever you want to call that. And so in this time that we're facing now, in the current movement of Black Lives Matter, again, through Black improvised music, this can possibly form a framework, at least an ideological framework, that can help the movement, that can help us all right now. So, firstly, just want to provide a little bit of context. Let's see. Stokely Carmichael in 1967 wrote that the concept of Black power rests on a fundamental premise that before a group can enter the open society, it must first close ranks. By this we mean that group solidarity is necessary before a group can operate effectively from a bargaining position of strength in a pluralistic society. Now with that, I recall also being in the, as an observer, the Occupy movement in DC, the Occupy DC movement, which in the context of, again, of Washington, DC, could be thought of as a sort of a precursor to the movement for Black Lives, as it's called. And in that movement, in Occupy, I remember there were certain groups that were formed, Black-only groups, Black women-only groups, Black male-only groups. But the fact of the matter is, we closed ranks. And the reason for that is because there are certain conversations, frankly, that need to happen within the Black community without the gaze of outsiders or of infiltration. So in talking about some early organizations, before we talk about sort of the certain key organizations in the 60s and early 70s, just some examples. And this is all from the George Lewis book, Power Stronger Than Itself, which is an overview of the AACM Black experimental music, as he calls it. So firstly, the Shoe Fly Regiment, which was by Bob Cole. You can Google all this, by the way. It's the first theater production company completely conceived, created, and run by African Americans in 1898. And they also drafted the Colored Actors Declaration of Independence, in which we're going to have our own shows, quoting, "We are going to have our own shows, we're going to write them ourselves, we're going to have our own stage manager, our own orchestra leader, and our own manager out front to count up." This was in 1898. Also notable, James Reese Europe, one of the, I guess you could say, forefathers of what we now call jazz, and Will Marion Cook, same person, same thing. Not same person, but another early founder of what we call jazz now. James Reese Europe and Will Marion Cook founded the Clef Club with branches in Harlem and Chicago back in 1910. Fast forwarding to sort of the bebop movement, Charles Mingus and Max Roach started their own firm, Debut Records, and released their own music. Not to mention Sun Ra, El Saturn Records, but also about Charles Mingus and Max Roach organized a musician-run festival of Newport rebels to protest the 1960 Newport Jazz Festival as an alternative to what was seen as gross commercialism, racism, and economic exploitation. This alternative festival attracted the support and participation of many established jazz artists of the day, such as then new stars such as Ornette Coleman and Randy Weston, as well as elders such as Coleman Hawkins, Philly Joe Jones, not Philly Joe, Joe Jones, and Roy Eldridge. And out of this alternative festival came another organization which was called the Jazz Artists Guild. It's funny that we're still celebrating the Newport Jazz Festival after all this. Gigi Grice and Benny Golson also founded their own publishing company called Melotone and Totem, because they felt that musicians were being cheated out of their rightful earnings. This was in the 60s as well. Once established, many in the record industry refused to work with any artists with music published by them, by Melotone or by Totem. By 1963, 1 year before the October Revolution in jazz, one thing that we're going to talk about, Gigi Grice had finally released his artist publishing rights due to suffocating pressure from the recording industry, who would not hire musicians who did not follow the established system. Some of the artists who published work with Gigi Grice's company were some of the top names in jazz of the day, including Thelonious Monk, Benny Golson, Clifford Brown, Lou Donaldson, Hank Jones, Randy Weston, and Lee Morgan. John Coltrane. John Coltrane, Yusef Lateef, and Babatunde Olatunji worked together to organize independent performing spaces and a booking agency before Train's untimely death in 1967. But they drafted a mission statement: 1, to regard each other as equal partners in all categories. 2, not to allow any booking agent or promoter to present one group without the other 2 members present. 3, to explore the possibility of teaching the music of our people, of Black people, in conservatories, colleges, and universities where only European musical experience dominates and is being perpetuated. Now, before we go into the specifics of the organization, I want to talk a little bit about why organize like this. Reactionary reasons, or through just real life reasons? What is clear across the board in each community arts liberation organization in Black improvised music is that they all shared similar reasons for coming together. Firstly, and most importantly, is that they came together to develop collective economics and to hopefully garner better opportunities for financial gain. For musicians in the 60s, many were still beholden to the established music industry system, the cabaret system, and the musicians' unions. In many cities, musicians who were also involved in the quote-unquote new thing, avant-garde jazz, things that they were calling it, were purposefully or otherwise not involved in this system, the established music industry, and were thusly practically unemployed. Money made from music was already scarce, but being at the margins of the established music industry in aesthetic and in business caused a greater degree of poverty in many of the musicians we now call innovators. And this continues to this day, too. Organizing under a single self-determined banner forged methods for monetary compensation that would not be possible otherwise. In booking their own performances, musicians were also able to collect their own proceeds, sometimes collecting more than they would otherwise in the established music industry system. Secondly, musicians forming collectives within their own communities developed a sense of confidence and liberation through that collectivity. Free from the usual demands of the music industry and the overall jazz scene, musicians could feel comfortable to explore and develop their own compositional bodies of work, develop their own improvisational language, and ultimately create more effective and potent music, artistically raising the bar among the greater music community. Thusly, the effects of the liberation movements of the time were undeniably influential in the formation of these organizations, with the musicians striving to share their sense of freedom with the greater community. In each organization, focused attention was given to forging relationships with other political and social organizations and with the community at large. Through educational programs, schools, artist-run venues, alternative venues such as parks, sidewalks, laundromats, meetups, and overall interaction with the community, the musicians' organizations were able to create lasting partnerships within their hometowns and establish legacies that continue to be felt in the present. One thing about that, in terms of being undeniably influenced by the movements of the day, look towards the organization founded in Jackson, Mississippi in 1969 called the Black Musicians Artists Association, I believe, founded by Alvin Fielder, drummer, and who was also an early member of the AACM, and also James Reese, not James Reese Ure, but James Reese, who was originally from Oakland and also interacted with young members of what would become the Black Panther Party. So lastly, one last reason. Musicians form collectives out of the basic need for musical development. At just the basic level, a musician wants to get better. Many were turned off or disbanded from again, the established music industry and popular trends in the 60s. Plus, there were, in the 1960s, truly innovative artistic movements happening largely under the radar. And that's across the board. In order to further develop these innovations, many thought it useful to collectivize, which made it possible to learn from and share with peers in healthy and sometimes fierce creative competition, which again raises the artistic level of the collective and the greater music community. Standards were established, morally and musically, and were continuously elevated. So before we get into the details, we are going to hear from, this is Bill Dixon, the Bill Dixon and Archie Shepp Seventet. And we're going to be talking about the October Revolution in jazz. It's on Spotify and YouTube. You can go and listen to that some more. That was just the coda for the entire piece. So for this section, amongst some other people, the key interviews were with Ben Young, former programmer at WKCR, and also the author of Bill Dixon's biography, Dixonian, and also Sharon Vogel, who is Bill Dixon's partner up until his death, as well as Stephen Haynes, who was a sort of a protege of, well, he would say he's a protege of Bill Dixon. So just to provide context again for the music industry, the jazz music industry in the 60s, there was so one thing to focus on, one thing to realize is that today we have the internet, we have websites, we have social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and we have a fledgling music industry as well. But in the 1960s, there was a sizable jump from the DIY level, the underground, which is where a lot of these musicians live in an industry context. There's a jump from that to Downbeat, Columbia Records, Blue Note, what have you. If you weren't getting written about in Downbeat, if you weren't getting written about in Downbeat, you weren't playing at the Village Vanguard, you weren't getting the record deal with Blue Note. If you weren't already in that system, you're not there. You don't exist. So, in the spring of 1964, Bill Dixon curated a monthly series of concerts at the Cellar Cafe in Manhattan's Upper West Side, which featured specifically those musicians who were unable to find work in New York's jazz establishment. Located below street level on West 91st Street in the Upper West Side of Manhattan, Dixon produced concerts on Sunday afternoons. His one rule was that anyone could play at the Cellar as long as they weren't playing any other place. As a result, they got a reputation for a certain kind of music. Between May and September of that year, Bill Dixon programmed nearly 20 Sunday afternoon concerts at the Cellar, including performances by artists such as Sun Ra, Pharoah Sanders, Rashid Ali, Sonny Murray, Paul Motion, Jimmy Jufree, and Albert Eiler. In the early 60s up to 1964, many communities within the United States and around the world were coming together in various organizations to change the conditions that had oppressed them. In 1960, the African independence struggles had culminated in an explosion of the successful overthrow of colonial subjugation. 17 nations had gained independence through decolonization in this year of Africa, just to provide more context to these actions. Concurrently, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee had been formed by groups of young Americans to fight racial injustice as part of the burgeoning civil rights movement. Black artists had begun to reflect this radical spirit more overtly. Popular artists such as John Coltrane began creating music to speak directly to the struggles of not only Black Americans, but to humanity as a whole, evident in what many call his magnum opus, A Love Supreme, which was recorded in 1964, same year. Writer and political organizer Amiri Baraka had published Blues People, then Leroy Jones, in 1963, giving a strong voice to the aesthetic of jazz while accurately placing the avant-garde Black improvised music, then called the new thing, within the context of the radical tradition of Black American musicians. Quoting from Blues People, these young musicians I will call, for lack of a more specific term, avant-garde. It has been said many times that this generation of Americans, my own generation, was born during the Depression, grew up in World War II, and grew to maturity in college or elsewhere during the Korean War, a major catastrophe for each decade of their lives. And now that they are moving toward a fourth decade, the 60s, an even more violent catastrophe is within easy reach of reality. This music is significant of more radical changes and reevaluations. We got 5 minutes left. All right. October Revolution in Jazz, Bill Dixon, 1964. Probably the most famous of these organizations, the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians, founded in the South Side of Chicago in 1965. Of dynamic and visionary artists formed. Other organizations such as the Black Artists Group of St. Louis, the Union of God's Musicians and Artists Ascension in Los Angeles, also called the Underground Music Association. Questions? You got something to say? What's up? Take questions.
Thank you for bringing out this amazing history. It's incredible. I wanted to ask you, do you have any, I wanted to know a little bit more about some of the women. I don't know if you have time to answer because I know you only got like 2 minutes now, but like Jean Lee or Nina Claudia Myers, and also you're talking about Black-owned, Betty Carter had to start her own record label. So I just wanted to shout them out and see if you had any commentary on the women.
Thank you very much. In fact,
you also have Ella Fitzgerald with Verve Records as well. So there were many female, African-American Black females just as prolific inside of the cliched avant-garde movement as power as men. But we know that dealing with the historical documentation of the Black Power movement that there was a lot of gender role play and suppressing with women being in the back burner. Thus you have a lot of Black feminist groups that are evolving from that era and stronger up to the current present tense. So yes, in addition to what you had, there were many other females. Of course, you have Dorothy Ashby, who was a jazz harpist, outside of Alice Coltrane. Alice Coltrane eventually leading upon John Coltrane's transition further the music, taken into a deeper context of African spirituality, animism, as well as Hinduism and things of this sort.
One more person that's very important. Also in Los Angeles, in the formation of the Pan-African People's Orchestra, Horace Tapscott, Union of God's Musicians of Arts Ascension, Linda Hill, which is the person whose house they actually rehearsed at. So this was in 1961. Linda Hill opened up her home. She was also a musician, but she would have all these funky men up in there, you know, playing crazy music at all hours of the day and night. So.
Hi there. Okay. Firstly, I really like the idea of a movement based on improvisation. I think that's very exciting. The question I have is about the moment of clarification and confidence building that separation creates. My question is from somebody from the UK, in Europe, where we have questions of racism, questions of nationalism. At what point do you believe that moment of clarification and focus and confidence building will be sufficiently developed to be at a point where the intelligence that you develop can be shared with other like-minded movements around the world?
Believe that clarification and unification at an intelligent level can happen upon when everyone removes all the distractions that's taking place. Removing all the distractions, what I mean by that is all the materialistic things that are taking place. When we go back eventually to the original source of creation, source of spirituality, source of who you are, source of oneness, source of universal oversoul, and understanding that point of where you're at in the epic of creation, and understanding that in all that cultural context, then we can begin to resume back to a one common place and bring everything together. But until we get to that point, there's always going to be the separatism, separation, classism, and things of that sort right there.
One other thing to say about that is that where we're at right now, it's impossible. It's impossible. I'll tell you, we're in Harvard. One black secret that we talk about, maybe y'all know. The biggest killer, the greatest thing that disrupted the black community was integration. During segregation, we had our own stores that we had to go to. We had our own communities that we had to live in. But this is what the elders say. The community was strong. The community was together. Everybody was on the same page, largely. And then integration happened, and everybody wanted to go to the white folks. And now, especially in societies like the UK and Canada, France, all over Europe, that are really struggling with this concept of multiculturalism, which is a farce, because even in those societies and across the board, worldwide, multiculturalism is not justice, it's not liberation, because in all those societies, you still see black people at the bottom. When you go to the bottom of society, who do you find? Black people. You find other people too, but you always find black people at the bottom in all those societies. So in the idea of multiculturalism, Charles Tyler talks about, the great sociologist who coined the term. We have to look at it like that. If you go to any country in this world, if you go down to the hood in Boston, yeah, who do you see? That's my answer to that.